everybody, we're at the Imp and Ogre. My name is Paul.
This is Ryan.
Today we are going to be chatting about the Voyage of the Golden Dragon.
Yes, so The Voyage of the Golden Dragon was written by Nicolas Logue. This is a 3.5 edition D&D Eberron adventure designed for 4 7th level PCs, originally published in 2006. Available on the DM's Guild.
Yeah, this adventure is kind of 4 in 1, all taking place on an amazing airship, except for one. I think you dart off to go investigate some ruins. But in short, you defuse the bomb in phase 1. Part 2 is...
It's a bunch of linked mini adventures all around a airship.
Yeah. So part one's preventing catastrophe and stopping the airship from blowing up effectively or crashing. Part 2 is stopping a lab from blowing up and a bunch of political intrigue on board, which is confusing. Part 3, you just go check out a citadel and fight some undead giants. And then part 4 is the most amazing part of it, where you fight dragons and dinosaurs.
It's an aerial assault.
Yeah.
So I picked this adventure because I love Eberron. Unapologetic Eberron fanboy. I loved it when it came out. I still love it now. I will admit I haven't looked at the 5th edition sort of revamp of it, but it's my favorite setting by far and away. It's like a magical steampunk setting, if you will, right? There's airships, there's trains. It's just a great concept for a setting, and I don't know how familiar you are with Eberron whatsoever.
Not familiar whatsoever.
I'll have to lend you some books. But some of my favorite aspects of the sort of the design decisions that were made in generating the setting were things like there's lots of low-level NPCs, right? So like there's lots of level 1 adepts and what have you. So magic in general isn't uncommon, but high-level NPCs are super rare. And some of this I'm trying to remember from years ago, but I seem to recall like there's only one 20th level of version of each class. So like in the entire game world, there's one level 20 druid, right? Versus there being tons of high level stuff. And I just remember that specifically because I think in Eberron, the level 20 druid is an awakened tree. So if you wanted to go meet the best druid on the planet, it's a tree in the forest. So there was lots of cool stuff that was introduced in this setting. This is where Warforged were first introduced. So the sentient constructs that you can play. Changelings are from this setting. So like pseudo doppelgangery player race. Shifters also, the part lycanthrope class, race, I guess. They all come from this, and they're all very fun, flavorful player races. And the whole sort of premise behind the setting is there's this continent that's dominated, or was dominated, by this big country, and the country basically separated into different spots. It broke apart into different countries based off of like I think it was the children of the king that was in this big country. So there's all these smaller countries that sort of fractionated off of this major country. And the setting begins at the end of a 100-year war. So all of these smaller countries are just basically coming back to the peace talk tables following a century of conflict. And the thing that precipitated the end of the war was the destruction of one of these nations. So the country that actually developed the Warforged gets destroyed in a magical attack, and that's sort of what precipitated the end of the war. So the peace talks and what have you. So you have all of these countries that don't really trust each other. There's all these wounds from, decades and generations of conflict. So there's tons of interesting potential for political intrigue. And I mean, I could go on and on and on. There's, magical family lineages that are marked by these crazy magical tattoos that you can get. These are the dragon marked houses, and they're specialized in different things. There's the courier dragon marked house. There's a dwarf one that's all in banking, and there's all of these sort of government agencies involved. There's all these private factions based off of these magical family connections, and it's just all kinds of fun things. And also one thing that was particularly interesting about it at the time, which has kind of bled into D&D in general, is that there was a country that sort of formed at from the ashes of this conflict that's a monstrous country. So it's all full of, it's run by hags, but it's minotaurs and hobgoblins and blah, blah, blah. All these intelligent monster races basically band together to form their own political entity. So you can have monstrous player classes without it being too out of the ordinary. So if you want it to be a hobgoblin or a goblin, or there's, minotaurs working at the docks and whatnot, like that's pretty common in this setting. So it's a very flavorful, very interesting setting that allows for a lot of fun stuff that is, at the time when it first came out was very setting specific, but sort of has gone everywhere else. And I probably really liked it a lot at the time because it's pretty much like a pen and paper, Final Fantasy setting
right.
to a certain extent, which is definitely my cup of tea.
Yeah.
Also one thing you might appreciate is one of the things that I always thought was cool about this setting is they got rid of the dragon biases. Right, like traditionally the chromatic dragons are evil and the metallic dragons are good.
Yeah.
Not in Eberron, a dragon is a dragon. So you can be an evil gold dragon or a good red dragon.
Nice.
And, that was super cool to me at the time, at least. Anyways, I'm going to not talk about the setting anymore, but it's lots of fun if you're not familiar.
Sounds fun. Yeah. Back to the adventure.
Tangent aside. So I guess is there anything in general you wanted to speak about it, or should we just get into the hooks?
I think we just get into the hooks.
Okay. The only other thing I wanted to add in regards to the adventure in general is it's very modular. Like as you said, that's 4 little mini adventures.
Yeah, you could stop after any one of these parts and go on and do something else, and it could be like an ongoing overarching campaign is traveling on the airship and doing different parts of it.
Exactly.
And plug and play other things in between.
And you don't have to run all of them. Like you pick which ones you like, and they're pretty self-contained, very loosely linked to each other, which gives you some flexibility as a DM, which is kind of nice. In terms of the hooks, I thought it was a little underdeveloped. It's a bit too vague for what I think is required.
Yeah, I mean, really, you just have to be at the christening event, and however you end up there is up to the DM, really. They suggest using a patron to be their hired bodyguards. Another one is someone that you knew couldn't go, so they gave you the tickets. It's just, you just got to be there.
This adventure definitely needs to be part of an ongoing campaign. It is sort of a mid-level adventure, so it sort of assumes that you've been doing other stuff with your players. I don't think it works particularly well as a let's just play D&D type of adventure. So what I would kind of want is a hook that's definitely tied to what's happened before. Also, the link between the first part and the second part is fairly weak. Like the reason to be there at the party, the christening party, it doesn't really matter. But to get the players on the ship for the remainder of the adventure, I think you need a better reason. So I would probably want to have the players associated with the airship itself some way. So either they've been hired by the owners to provide private security, would be the easiest thing, right? They're hired for private security at the christening. Well, there's the problem at the christening that we'll talk about. Their contract gets extended for the maiden voyage just to make sure there's not more problems. You know, like something like that makes sense, because as is, and I guess we can talk about it now, at the end of the first mini bit, the players are either, hired to stay on as extra security or blackmailed to stay on as extra security, basically dependent on whether they were successful or not.
Yeah.
And I didn't really like that, again, because this is a super expensive airship. Why would you just want a bunch of random people based off of one success to be your hired security? So unless the players have a reputation for anything at this point in the city, it doesn't really work for me. So I'd want to run this with the intention of running this in the future so I can build in the connections leading into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
whatever works for your particular setting.
Yeah. I guess the first event that you probably will see is the Minotaurs loading stuff onto the ship. Could be partly involved in. I
think it's supposed to. I don't know if the players necessarily will see that. I think you can sort of narrate a scene. I think it's supposed to basically be a foreshadowing for stuff that's to come.
They need to observe it.
Yeah. So the basic idea is this airship that's been built is going to be the largest airship afloat. So it's a big deal, and this has drawn the ire of a Lazarite sky pirate who's also building a ship that was going to be the largest ship afloat, but now will be the second largest ship. And he's not happy about that. So he's hired some saboteurs to scuttle the ship, if you will, to basically cause it to fall out of the sky. The one thing that's actually not pointed out in here is it's docked in Sharn, the city of spires, if you will, which, if you're not familiar with the setting whatsoever, is an urban metropolis, and the airship docks are kind of in the middle. So if this giant airship was basically taken out of the sky, it would crash down on other districts and kill like thousands of people. So it's not like you're sinking it in the harbor. It would be a giant disaster, huge catastrophe. It would cause untold amounts of damage and loss of life if it just crashed in the middle of the city.
Yeah.
So I thought it was a bit strange that there wasn't even just sort of like a token mention that would be bad.
Superheroes don't worry about collateral damage, though.
So yeah, I guess you're at a party, and the role of the party, like, it depends what you're there for, right?
Yeah.
The ship is a cruise ship, I guess, is the important thing to point out, that it's not it was originally designed as a military ship, but it was never completed. It was hired by or bought by a private investment group that's turning it into basically the Sky Titanic. So it's a luxury cruise ship, if you will. It has a gambling casino. It has a massage facilities.
Right. Yeah.
It's got an excellent cook and dining facility, high-end suites and what have you. It's a luxury transport thing. So it's very hoity-toity. So the players might be working on it, I guess, or hired, but it's high class, and the creme de la creme of the city is in attendance for the christening party.
Right.
So lots of nobles, lots of dignitaries, lots of money.
Yeah, and I think to start, you're meant to just kind of putter about until you trigger the event, which is this is a takeover scene. And I don't think there's too much that your players could really do. You could go gamble a bit, I guess, or go get a massage or whatever and kind of mingle and talk to people. But it's very undirected, and you'd probably get, I think players probably get kind of bored pretty quick.
It depends on your players, and it depends on how you set it up. It really depends on what the reason they're there for, right? If they're entertainment, you just have a couple words about them, singing songs or dancing or whatever. If they're there with a patron, there might be some conversation based off of past experiences, but it really is up to the DM at that point. But it all kicks off when Hobgoblins, basically burst onto deck, saying, everyone put their hands up. This is a hostage. This is
and I think they
robbery,
execute
really, but
hostages too in it.
I think they can. I don't know that they do initially. Basically,
it's like the threat of executing hostages. So if you decide to act, they just execute hostages, and then you're left doing nothing, right? So you just have to watch it happen and figure out some way to act eventually, which is like...
It's a bit punishing to begin with because it is sort of forced inaction. And to sort of exacerbate the problem is the dignitaries and the nobles don't really care.
Yeah, no.
Right? They're just sort of like, again.
And they'll try and motivate you to not do anything because their strategy is like, oh, it's just a ransom thing.
It's only 200,000 gold pieces.
Pay. Like, just don't say anything that's going to get us hurt. So that's their standpoint on it. And you being PCs are going to want to do something about it. So
they're sort of just the price of doing business as far as they're concerned.
They're just like,
okay, 200,000 gold pieces.
Yeah, sure.
It's going to take about an hour.
Yeah.
Right. So if the player's trying to get involved, someone's going to die. And that actually might lead to interesting complications later because as a DM, you can pretty much pick who gets executed.
Yeah, there's no real suggestion.
What the Empress just was eliminated, and that's all your fault.
Yeah.
Right? Or what have you.
So however you decide to deal with it, I will say that I thought the Hobgoblin fighter was awesome. He like ties in nauseating smoke sticks into his hair, and he thinks he's so amazing and awesome that he will also be nauseated by it. But
he's a barbarian. He's just like, he assumes his Constitution save is going to be good enough to get through it.
So he's got this big smoke cloud around him, and I thought that was just like an awesome thing if you were ever creating a character that you can. I kind of like. I don't think I do it very much, but it's like if you were the player doing detrimental things to yourself for the fun of it, that's not optimal. Like, it's ridiculous. But it's so much flavor that it's cool.
I once had a character in a campaign that the player decided it was a barbarian, but their deal was they could only rage if they were drunk. So there was more than one situation where he's like, nope, can't rage. I just got up. I'm a little hungover, but I'm not, angry enough. Yeah. I think it was a Pathfinder game, so he was a subclass that was a drunken rager, and he's just like, nope, can't rage if I'm not drunk. I'm like, okay. So he had a little custom brandy flask that he was nipping all the time. So it's kind of fun when that actually happens. And I've had multiple games where players have played their characters appropriately, done the wrong thing that they as a player know is wrong, but as a character they don't have the information, so they're just like, no, that's what my character would do. They don't know that this type of monster is immune to this type of magic damage or whatever. So it's always nice when you can have players that can dissociate from the actual their player knowledge, and just sort of have fun with it.
And I think that's the value, because we play in play-by-post games online, but it's you have the opportunity to dissociate yourself from the character and really play a character, where it's hard to do, I think, in person at a table, to not just be yourself when you're playing.
It's definitely one advantage of that format. For sure.
So the goal of, which I also thought was very clever, of the hijacking crew is to disable the lift and flight mechanics of the airship, which is elementals. And the water elemental in particular, who create,
or fire elemental.
They work in tandem, I think. I think the fire elemental heats the water elemental, which creates steam, or however it works in Eberron, right? So they have a banishment bomb, which I thought was awesome, right? They're not getting rid of the elemental; they're just banishing it to its plane for a bit, and then the plane will crash. And I thought that's very clever and.
I also thought it was pretty clever that the hobgoblins actually think it's a hostage situation. They don't know that they're basically fodder.
Gonna die.
So the actual mastermind behind it hasn't passed that information around. Now, that does lead to what I thought was a bit of a weakness in this first part, is I think as written, what happens is another hobgoblin comes onto deck to talk to the boss hobgoblin and says, I think there's something dodgy about this. what's his face, down below is up to something. And I heard him muttering to himself about the money not mattering because they're going to have to spend it in, hell effectively.
Yeah.
And that's supposed to be your tip off that there's more to this.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't really like that. Right. What I was thinking is if you had the situation where maybe like the banishment bomb sort of was ramping up and you can have, say, maybe tremors in the ship, or maybe the ship sort of lists all of a sudden. And so obviously something else is going on.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have something like that happen, turbulence, if you will, that could provide the players with an opportunity to strike, right? Because the hobgoblins, maybe he loses his hostage or something like that.
Yeah.
And whether or not you sort of make it a conflict, but it does imply that there's something else going on, because the hobgoblin can be like, what's going on down there? Like this,
Yeah.
Then you get confusion, and then the reason to go investigate might be a little bit clearer.
Mm-hmm. And the thing, I mean, the steam room battle, I think, is the next section we're getting to, but there's no lose condition here. You win no matter what, right? And it's just like,
assuming you don't die from fighting.
Fighting, yeah, but like the banishment bomb's not going off ever.
It could.
No, because
an NPC comes to help,
mm-hmm.
but that assumes that the players don't just start messing with it right from the get-go.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because if they pick it up and try to move it without trying to figure out what it does, it just goes off.
Yeah.
So if your players are incautious, it could be a very short adventure. But as written, if the players make their knowledge checks or wait for people to come and help,
mm-hmm.
It should be fine.
I think it would be difficult to figure out too in this, because reading my notes, it's the fire elemental that creates the lift, so they're trying to banish the fire elemental, but you'd need to know that the only way it's going to go off regardless. I don't think you can diffuse the bomb.
You can't diffuse it. It goes off if it's moved is the issue.
So you need to, and once it's moved, you can move it a certain amount of time before, I think it's 4 rounds or something, but it's enough time to get it to the water elemental, which can be safely banished, so the bomb goes off and banishes the water elemental. But I don't know how you would figure that out.
There's some knowledge checks that need to get made, or once again, that NPC knows it.
Mm-hmm.
Also, they just need to get the bomb off of the ship. So there are some, depending on what your party makeup is and the resources available to them, it's possible, right? Like a dimension door or something like that. You can easily get it off of the ship. Or, you break a hole in the side of the ship. You could just bust a hole in the side and throw it out.
Yeah.
Which would cause damage, but would save the ship.
Yeah.
Because, the alternative, like the as-written way that it happens, the water elemental gets banished, but when it comes back, it breaks free. So now you have an angry water elemental on the ship, so it's going to cause damage either way.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, you're supposed to prevent this and then follow after the saboteur, or somehow make your way into the hold.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm not really sure, again, how you're supposed to know to go check out the hold at this point.
Yeah.
Other than the fact that, there was Minotaurs, and then you saw Minotaurs loading stuff up or what have you. So, again, that link is a bit
loose.
Mm. Though in the hold, there's a Warforged Juggernaut with a giant crab claw, which is awesome.
Yeah, pretty cool.
So you kind of want that fight to happen.
Yeah, so then you fight him, and then that's resolved. And
because he's protecting his wizard buddy that may escape on one of the skiffs, because there's little floating side boats.
Yeah.
What I did like, though, is all the little floating side boats can be recalled automatically. But if you do that, he just jumps off because he's not going back to prison.
Yeah.
So if you don't take him alive in the conflict, you're probably not going to take him alive at all. Now, one thing I did think was kind of neat, and the players will never find out, but they talk about the relationship between the wizard saboteur and the Warforged, and that the wizard guy or artificer or whatever he is found the Warforged in the scrap heap at the prison and repaired him, which is why the Warforged is loyal to this little criminal guy. And I thought that was just a nice little world building touch, if you will, that has absolutely nothing to do with anything. But I'm like, oh, well, that's
yeah.
nice.
I remember reading that and thinking kind of the same thing. Yeah.
But regardless, you save the day, and you don't really find out what's going on. Like, there's no real indication to this. The only thing you can find out is that the guy, the saboteur, has some fairly distinctive silver coins on him. And the silver coins actually have an arcane mark on it. So if the players use detect magic on the money, which why would they? But if they do, they can find out that the mark is associated with a prince or something like that, a merchant prince maybe, and then you can find out that it was like that person was killed and his cargo was hijacked or blah, blah, blah. So you can link the money back to pirates through a very convoluted method, which the players probably won't.
Unless at some point in the campaign there was player knowledge that like you could trace money with magic, or the houses trace their money with magical imprint on it or something. Yeah,
like if you've built that into your setting already, or used that in the setting in the past, then that would make a little bit.
And
more
sense. Perhaps by the time you're running this adventure at 7th level, you've run Eberron before.
You should have.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So you could build that into the world. The next section, labeled Cloak, Dagger, and Spell, is like the big political intrigue section of the adventure, I guess, and very
chaotic,
hard to keep track of. Yeah, chaotic's a good word for it. It's broken down to events, I guess.
There's a lot going on in here.
This is you would be in transit, I guess, on the boat going to your location, destination.
Yeah, so as written, you're going from Breland, which is one of the nations, to Zendrick, which is a separate continent. It's like the jungle continent, if you will, land of the lost. But man, there's
a lot going on. So I broke it in just about the events, really. I mean, you start off by seeing an argument happen.
Sure.
And
the ambassadors is what we're talking about?
Yeah. And then one of the guys will invite you for dinner, basically, and then give you a bunch of information.
So this is a lot of inside baseball, if you will. Like the Voyage is transporting messengers, so couriers and ambassadors, to the southern continent, where they're just passing information off to their agents there. So it's not really a diplomatic mission, but it's being kind of used as that on this pleasure cruise. So the two ambassadors in question are a Carnathi ambassador and then Thrain. Yeah. So Thrain in the setting is a religious theocracy devoted to a good god. We'll put some air quotes around it, or good gods. The sovereign host, I think it is. I could be wrong. And then Carnath is basically the undead country.
Yeah, they're skeletons. That's awesome.
I was a bit confused because in the adventure, I'm like, I don't think Carnath's skeletons work like this. So I actually looked it up, and then I went on Keith Baker. He's the guy who invented Eberron. He's got a blog. So I was like, how do they actually work? So I was Googling Carnathi skeletons. So the nation during the Great War basically was running out of soldiers, so they worked out a ritual to raise them as undead soldiers. But the Carnathi skeletons, or undead or whatever, aren't. They're not. It's not raised dead, right? So you're not bringing the person back again. They're animated by some sort of malevolent intelligence. And some of the important sort of features of them is that they only speak if spoken to, and they don't take any initiative on their own. So if you order them to do something, they'll do it, but they won't take any proactive action. And it was pretty great reading about this, because like what's actually animating them, we don't know. Right? They're all lawful evil, right? All the people, like the Carnathi, like the people themselves, are not lawful evil. So you're not bringing back, John the Soldier. You're animating the corpse of John the Soldier with something that's got an intelligence and is cruel and evil.
But subservient.
But at least outwardly subservient.
Right.
So that was one of the great things I was reading. And there's like, they follow orders. Nobody knows why.
Okay.
And like, the upper echelons of the Carnathi military are a little freaked out because there's no guarantee that they won't just suddenly turn on them. So there's this sort of really interesting tension politically regarding it, which anyways, that's problematic to me at least, because canonically there's some issues with this adventure because at least the one of the Carnathi skeletons displays agency, and that shouldn't be something that actually happens in the adventure. So once again, like the average player may not care, right? Like, but a lore nerd like
fun
me
facts out there,
got a little peeved by this. But anyway, so there's an argument about it because the Thrain country does not like the undead.
Sure.
And he's got a couple of paladin bodyguards, and anyways, there's an angry theological discussion, if you will.
Yeah, and like I guess there's just a lot going on in this section. There's no directions, so the players are sort of left up to their own devices to talk to people and stuff. I guess the main driven event here is that Gunter is found dead, who you get asked to investigate.
He's a scribe in the Carnathi diplomatic party.
Yeah.
So he's found dead.
So, and there's clues to him being potentially assassinated or
He's poisoned.
If you're clever, and you can find out that his amulet resonates with necromancy type magic. But for all intents and purposes, you assume that he's dead in this section.
And then his body is put in the cargo hold or whatever.
Yeah, and there's the fight between the Carnathi and the Thrain that happens, and they kind of stop eventually. And
well, the big issue is that Gunther is actually a secret agent of some faction. I can't remember now. It's not the Blood of Vol. It's some other one. I can't. Or the Dragon Claw or the.
I didn't write it down.
Anyways, he's a member of some sort of secret organization, and what he's done is he's used Magic Jar, the spell, through his amulets to possess the body of the Thrainish ambassador. So he's not actually dead. He's possessing another body. And then while he's possessing the body, he basically orders the paladins to attack the Carnathi, and then he drinks poison, killing himself, returning to his own body, and then he teleports away to be seen later, which, whatever. So what you end up having is this huge diplomatic incident where you have a dead ambassador who he's penned a confession as well, right? That yes, I killed this person and I'm a bad person and blah 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 blah. And then you find him dead. At the same time, you have this fight that you're supposed to break up between the paladins, who are good, like these are good people, and the skeletons, who are not good or people, but not wrong. You know what I mean? Like. So it puts a really sort of odd tension on the players.
It's sort of like, you're choosing your side at this point in the adventure, I think, if you're going to carry on to keep doing stuff, because you could side with anybody, really. Yeah. And there's even, I think the massage elf guy is like an agent of some other...
We'll get to that.
Yeah, it's like...
There's a lot of stuff going on this boat.
Yeah,
but this the whole ambassador issue is super nutty because it depends on the players understanding the politics of what's going on. Otherwise, it's super random. So again, it's one of those things that you really kind of need to have that aspect in your campaign previously for it to really make sense. Okay.
It would be a really difficult adventure to pick up and say, hey, we're going to try Eberron.
Yes.
We're level 7 characters all of a sudden. I don't think this is not the adventure to do that. You're playing this as part of your Eberron setting already, and you've developed, what the factions are.
Yeah,
like there'd be some player knowledge about the history of it, or lots of information readily available.
You'd be super lost if you were just coming in and doing it this way, for sure. Anyways, that's kind of it. You're stuck with the situation. How you play it out is absolutely dependent on the players going forward and the DM. Like, it gives you lots of opportunities of what you wanted to pursue beyond that, but kind of that's it that happens there. I mean, another major thing that happens during this part of the adventure is there's a courier who has their messages stolen. And then they're planted on a guard who's actually a guard for the pirate prince that tried to scuttle the airship in part 1, who's on board again to try to sabotage the ship. So that's super kind of confusing. And then the issue with the courier, he was actually robbed by the owner of the casino, who turns out is actually a spy for Breland, which is the country that this ship is out of, if you will. So he's a member of a national spy organization, who are quote unquote the good guys, and the cook's also a spy, and they know each other. And you can figure this out through just sort of talking to people and investigating the situation. But what it does is it puts the players in the position where either you're aiding and abetting industrial espionage, or you're going against fantasy CIA agents, if you will, who are, once again, this is a good, quote unquote, good nation that they're members of, right? And there's no bad guy like involved in that sort of situation, but it forces the players to get involved into more politics, which again don't really play out in this adventure, but you could spin off into future plots later on.
Yeah, I don't know if it would be better to have some invested interest in like what's going on the boat, like if you had predetermined ties going in, if you had a loyalty to one of the nations already, because at this point it just to me feels like you're just observing, right? Like all this is happening and as players you're just kind of like, whoa, like what do we do, you know? But if part of your campaign had run up and been heavily involved in one of these, then you could sort of tilt in their favor a bit, or like have more invested in and maybe diffusing situations or whatever it is, right? So
you absolutely need to be involved in the politics.
There has
somehow.
To be some history with your campaign, I think, to make this part of the adventure make sense.
Yeah.
Or you could just cut it out, really, right? If there
it doesn't really add anything. It's just really interesting.
Yeah. So
there's that, and then I guess there's the pirate guy hired a doppelganger to sabotage the ship,
to blow up the laboratory on board or something like
while
that.
He's on board with it.
So that was, I think that was the other way that they were going to take down the ship was by blowing up, I don't know, an alchemical laboratory, perhaps.
The artificer lab. Basically, like artificers are like the alchemists of the setting. But then to make it even more convoluted, is the doppelganger is from the same gang as the half-elf masseuse, who's not actually a half-elf, he's actually a changeling that's on the run from the gang and thinks that the doppelganger is looking for him when he has nothing to do with anything whatsoever. So dealing with the masseuse can give you pointers towards this doppelganger, which can then maybe help you to stop the sabotage, which is a big maybe. Because as written, the only clue that you get is you bump into the artificer during a storm, and he's like, oh, I need to go secure the lab. And you're like, oh, okay. But if you go talk to the captain and say, oh, I just bumped into so-and-so, he's going to secure the lab, he'll be like, oh, I gave no such order. And then if you go to the artificer's cabin, he's just playing piano in there and be like, what? No, I wasn't there. So, but I thought it was interesting that the whole setup is that the artificer's lab's been rigged to explode, but it only explodes if the door is opened. So it's basically been booby-trapped. So the players can find the booby-trap and prevent it. But if they don't get involved in the plot, the next time the actual artificer, whose name I don't think I wrote down, goes to use the lab, it explodes, it kills him, and it destroys a chunk of the airship. Which doesn't scuttle it, so I'm not really sure what the whole purpose is. But anyways, you may discover that this is going to happen. You may discover that the pirate guy was involved in the initial sabotage because he is paying at the casino with the same kind of silver coins as you found on the other saboteur. How all this gets resolved, left up to the DM.
You know, I think there's just easier ways to give your party an airship. Like,
Oh, and that doesn't even include the fact that there's, what's his name? The guy who's the key point of the third part. Halas Martin.
Yeah.
Martin. Who is a scoundrel treasure hunter, philandering jerk, if you will, braggart, who you need to introduce during this part as well to really get more of a payoff for the third part.
So yeah, it's all just like a ton of stuff that I don't know.
It seems like it's super interesting and there's lots of stuff going on, but from like a logistical running standpoint, it feels like a nightmare to DM.
And maybe your party is like really interested in that kind of stuff, political intrigue and talking and murder mystery type adventure, but it's a ton, and you'd have to spend a lot of time reminding your players probably and allowing them to be like, who's that again? Or like, what did that nation do? And sitting there and giving them history, or else you're just going to be confused the entire time.
I'd probably cut at least one of the parts out. Right? So you kind of want to keep the pirate on there because that resolves that plot thread if you want to. Like, you don't have to.
But you need to keep the necromancer stuff involved.
You don't have to, or you got to change the third one. But in terms of like the political aspect, I'd keep either the courier stealing aspect or the ambassador part, just because it would be used for future stuff. Like, I would keep whichever one that I planned on using for future hooks.
I think the point would be to concentrate the theme. Like, there's like too many things going on, so you could, like you said, eliminate some things and focus on a couple of them would probably make for a better overarching adventure.
It'd make for a less confusing section of it, for sure.
But I mean, that said, like what you said in the beginning, I think you could stop the adventure at any point after each of one of these sections, and it wouldn't be one adventure run in 4 sections. This could be ran in between every part of the different adventures you're doing, right? Like after the first part, they could be like, oh, we can't take off. We got to make repairs to the elemental chambers. It'll be 3 weeks until we do it. You run something else. You come back. The next part of your adventure is travel. So I don't know.
Yeah, you could use bits and parts of it, but like to try to fit it all in there seems like a bit much.
It's tight.
And then again, there's no real resolution of it. Like, it's you decide what you're going to do, and eventually the ship reaches its destination. I think the only important point that you need to make is that the corpse of whatever the guy has disappeared from the cargo hold.
Gunter.
Yeah.
Is gone, yeah. So you land in the jungle, and Halas, who you introduced in the previous section, hires you to go check out these ruins.
I did like that you could set it up that either he hires you or he's asked the captain to borrow one of the longboats, and the captain doesn't trust him, so the captain hires you to make sure that the boat doesn't get broken, which I kind of like better because it really plays up the fact that this is an unreliable individual.
Yeah.
But then you just sort of, he takes the boat, you go with him, you go across the jungle to a cyclopean ruin. One of the things I enjoyed in reading it is that you're supposed to play up that as much of a jerk as this guy is, he knows his stuff about the continent. So while you're flying close, he's like pointing out the flora and the fauna and telling stories, and like he's in his element. He's competent. He's just like a jerk.
Yeah.
Because his whole plan is to basically just take all the treasure and all the glory, and he did it all himself.
So now you get to the dungeoning part of the Dungeons and Dragons, and there's like, I don't know, a couple traps here. You have a couple encounters with magma worms, and the whole point is that Gunter has come to this place to raise an undead army.
And Gunter being the guy who possessed the ambassador in part 2. This makes no sense to me.
No, so this would have to be coming from somewhere else before to make this thread make sense. Yeah,
I have no problem with the undead being made. I would eliminate Gunter from it completely. I could see using Gunter again as a recurring foil in another adventure, but as is, the fact that Gunter is going to a random ruin that also is the destination for Halas makes no logical sense whatsoever. Also, it's never expressly stated why our intrepid treasure hunter is coming here whatsoever. Right? There's not a thing to recover.
True.
So I'd probably tweak it that there is some sort of like idol or whatchamahoosit that he's here to get, and taking it triggers the raising of the undead.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't need to change the monsters or anything like that. You just remove the necromancer aspect of it. You actually give our treasure hunter a treasure to hunt, and those are the tweaks I would make for sure. Because other than that, there's not much here. You fight some undead giant skeletons, which are fun.
Yeah, it's cool.
But there's no treasure. There's nothing other than you're like, oh, it's Gunter, who like cackles a little bit, doesn't really explain anything, and then dies.
Yeah.
So I didn't care for that. The best part for me, though, for this part is when you leave. And there's the bounty hunters.
Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, that was beautiful for me, because I think the goal leading up to this point is you need to paint Halas as a super unlikable individual. So when the party leaves the temple and there's a bunch of bounty hunters there, it is like, hey, we have no problem with you. We're here to bring in Halas to our employer.
Yeah.
That the players are supposed to be like, you can have them.
Yeah. Yeah. We don't want anything to do with them anymore. Yeah, and take them.
And what I liked about that too is that either way, right? If you help him out and you fight at the bounty hunters and you return, if you like ask him about it, he's like, he grudgingly admits to like, yeah, my partner might have said something about, right? Like you could play it up like he knew this was going to happen, so he brought you along in case this happened.
Yeah.
But the part, the angle I appreciated more is if the players just say like, fine, yeah, have him. He's an intrepid treasure hunter. As much of a jerk as he is, he's competent. So he escapes almost immediately. And now he hates you.
Yeah.
And you can bring him back at a later point.
You can hear him yelling in the background like, I'm coming for you.
So you could use him as a recurring, maybe not a villain, but as a foil. You know, like this is where you could suddenly have more of a friendly rivalry. Like he doesn't necessarily want to kill you, but he'll always sort of try to mess up your plans type of aspect.
It'd just be like a funny start to an adventure. It's like you make it to the gates. Halas is exiting the dungeon as you show up, and he runs away. You're just like, dang it.
You know, and while you watch him beat it into the forest, a bunch of angry, you know, whatever comes running out after you. Like I think you could make for an entertaining, recurring
rival.
Yeah. It'd even be, the payoff would even be better is if the players had already previously encountered him and he had screwed them over somehow, to make them even more likely to repay the situation with the bounty hunters.
Yeah.
So again, I thought that was kind of fun, but that's basically it. Like you go to the location, you do some exploration, you get back on the boat, you return to your airship. Like that's it. Like there's nothing exciting in particular. It's pretty functional.
Yeah. And once back on the airship, in the short period of time you were gone, you realize that there's a whole host of animals on board now, and a drow druid.
So the ship has been hired by a university professor to carry his biological samples, his specimens, back to the university.
So you get greeted by the sounds of the jungle once again upon entering the airship, and there's monkeys and snakes and whatever kind of creatures you'd find in the jungle. And
dire animals. They're not like the small ones. It's like dire apes and whatnot. And you meet the professor, who's a little absent-minded gnome, and a local drow has helped him to get all of his specimens.
Drow druid.
Well, he doesn't necessarily know it's a druid.
True.
And also given him this lovely, commemorative idol to bring back for studying. And basically the idol is a special magic item that allows the druid to use tree stride into it. So the plan is basically been concocted by the druid to hijack the airship, because the drow are just not happy with all of the incursions that have been coming into their lands, if you will. So this is basically an opportunity to steal the airship and get some payback, if you will. Though it all comes together fairly quickly for an airship that doesn't exist before, right? So whatever.
Yeah.
So anyways, when most of the people are off the ship, so most people are out and about in town, the druid tree strides into the cargo hold, releases the animals, and you basically get involved when you hear screams of tigers and bears and what have you, tearing apart your remaining crew members. So that happens below. There's the druid. Also, drow on flying dinosaurs start to try to come to get you
Comes
from
like a
above.
skyjack. They're trying to hijack the boat airship while you're flying.
So they're not even flying. They try to steal it from Doc because the druid can control it using the helmety thing that they use or what have you. And then there's the aerial attack from the drow. There's a white dragon that shows up.
The best part about the white dragon is, like, I know we're not big fans of dragons in adventures, but the reason why the dragon's helping them is because he has believes that the airship is threatening his air domain. So he has a personal grudge against an inanimate airship.
It's his territory.
Exactly.
Right?
He's like, you can't have this airship around here. Like, I'll help.
No. I liked it. I like that he was, or her, I can't remember, but that the dragon's smart in that if it gets wounded enough, it's just like, nope.
Yeah, not worth it. Yeah.
It's not suicidal. He's just like, you know what? I guess I don't care enough about this. Whereas the druidess will fight till the end or what have you. So it's a pretty exciting end, and I like that the mounted drow on the aerial dinosaurs will strafe the deck and try to net people and drag them off of deck and then just drop them to their death. So it's this super exciting sort of three-dimensional fight that happens that makes for a very memorable sort of ending of the adventure. So presumably you survive and yay.
Yeah.
But I also like that all through dealing with the animals, the professor is following around being like, don't hurt them, don't kill them. They're my specimens. So he's basically comic relief that you're dealing with that's getting in the way and will try to stop you from harming his samples. He wants them recaptured. So I think that's designed to be more of a delaying tactic while the drow gain control. And I think that's sort of the angle you should play it up. So the player should be distracted with the animals below deck and not really notice that it's a hijacking until they sort of feel the ship move beneath them. And then it's pretty great because then you have to try to regain control and how do you pilot this thing? And it ends with a fairly entertaining sort of chaotic resolution. Now that being said, all of the episodic aspects of this adventure are very random, right? There's not a lot of coherency between it. They're all very fun to use. So you could kind of plug and play them. And really, you could just take any one of them and spin it off.
This should just be called things to do on an airship. It's like, you've got an airship. What to do next? Pick one of 4, and you can have mini adventures on any of your airship battles, right?
Yeah. Because really, it's not even your airship. You just happen to be on it. But what I like the best of this adventure is it presents a ton of NPCs. A ton of potential future patrons or contacts or foils. So that's what I like the most about it. So reading it almost seems more like campaign fuel. That if I needed an idea for building a campaign arc, reading this adventure, I'm like, okay, well, that guy's there. All right, there's the university. Maybe they're involved with that, and maybe they got hired to help bring this guy back. So that means they had to interact with this university before. So how did they do that? And then you can sort of spin it all together. Or I want the players to take advantage of this conflict between the ambassadors. So maybe which side should they be involved in? Or maybe they end up being the guards for one of them. Using it as sort of a way of generating ideas it feels better in that regard, because as a standalone adventure, it's really overstuffed.
There's a lot, yeah. There's no adventure identity, and there's a lot in it, but there's a lot to get out of it too, like you said. So if you're lacking patrons or NPCs in your adventure, run this, and you got.
I think it's super fun. Like I my complaint's not with like it per se. Like I think any of the little individual adventures are great, but taken as a whole, it feels fairly overwhelming. Now, that being said, if you've created a really dynamic campaign and all of your players have different affiliations, right? If one of them is Carnathy and one of them is from the university and then one of them, and so on and so forth. Like if there's all these ways that you can tie individual characters to it, so they all have their own little mini sort of connections, then it's less overwhelming. But like if the players as a whole don't, there's a lot to dump on them if they don't have some sort of
vested
idea
interest.
what's going on already. So, but that aside, I thought it was fun. Like thumbs up. Like I'm not poo-pooing
I agree,
on
yeah,
this
and I've never
whatsoever.
spent any time in the Eberron campaign setting, so yeah, it sounds pretty fantastical and magical and probably theme appropriate, right?
For the setting, like the whole point of it is it's supposed to sort of be a pulpy campaign setting. So like you're
over the top
adventure and excitement and big set pieces, like it
filled with
thematically
hyperbole and you know, dinosaurs are normal and
Indiana Jones, Land of the Lost, like it's supposed to be that kind of pulp adventure, Conan the Barbarian-esque craziness, and it fits the theme well. But if your players aren't invested in the setting or aren't familiar with some of the players and like campaign players involved, I think it could be confusing and a bit overwhelming. But for Eberron players, I think it's awesome.
Sweet, yeah. I think that's it for this adventure, guys. Thanks for listening. You can get us at theimpandogre@gmail.com or on the Twitters at theimpandogre. Next week, we'll be talking about Dead in the Thay. As always, thanks for listening.
Bye.